The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Now, there has been a revision in the direct school admission scheme, a system that allows students to secure spots in secondary schools based on their talents in areas such as sports and the arts beyond academic results. The Ministry of Education has announced plans to make the DSA scheme more accessible, transparent, and focus on nurturing untapped potential rather than just recognizing polished performance. But why the need for change now? And what will this mean for students, parents, and schools? Well, the Straits Times wrote an article about it titled Review of DSA Scheme Among MOE's Priorities for 2025, Chan Chun Sing. So if you want to read more, you can check out that article. But in the meantime, to find out more, joining us today is Gabrielle Chan, who's a journalist at the Straits Times. Hi, Gabrielle. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Gabrielle, the DSA system was introduced back in 2004 to recognize talents in areas like sports and the arts beyond academic results. Now, what were the key gaps that have been highlighted in the current DSA system that prompted this review?
Okay, so since the DSA's inception, I think there's always been a lot of conversation about how the DSA tends to favor families who are more well-resourced or more affluent, right? So these are families who can afford to send their children to classes, academies, or even, like preparatory classes where they can actually prepare for the DSA interview and stuff like that. So I think that is the first key gap, which is probably issues of accessibility. Second would probably be transparency concerns. There have been some talk about coaches having particular influences over certain admission of certain students.
Right.
Potentially, there are students in their academies and stuff like that. So I think even though schools were reminded, to always declare conflicts of interest, I think there has been issues of transparency and also whether these coaches actually declare the conflict of interest, right? And there's also been another issue of green harvesting, where schools often admit students who are already well trained in specific areas rather than, developing those of untapped potential. And schools may not prioritize developing all their students or rather choose to build, the strong, highly skilled team of DSA students. So overall, I think it's really the integrity of the DSA process that has been called into question. And I think Minister Chan mentioned that he wanted to make it more fair and accessible across the board. Yeah.
So, it was introduced back in 2004 and it's 2025 now. So why the need for change now? Why has the review of the DSA scheme become one of MOE's top priorities for this year?
So the DSA has actually been reviewed over the years since 2004. So I think within the last 5 years, there was a change to actually remove application fees for DSA and also to expand the intake of students so now I think it's 20%. So I believe MOE, the change this year is actually part of the ministry's larger priorities, to provide more options and more opportunities for all. So in the recent interview that we did with Min in December, he actually mentioned, his priorities of wanting to ensure that nobody loses out. Everyone has equal and fair access to all opportunities as much as possible. So, regardless of where you come from, whether you have training or whether you are more lower income, that there should be equal access to opportunities for all. I think that is the main drive for this change in 2025.
I see. Well, an ongoing review will reportedly result in changes to the scheme with the aim of ensuring that schools focus on students' development, the selection process remains objective and transparent, as you mentioned, and that the DSA continues to be accessible. In fact, the review is meant to tackle issues of something called green harvesting. Well, Gabrielle, what is green harvesting and how has it affected the way young talent is identified and developed?
Right, okay. So green harvesting actually refers to schools who actually select students who have already excelled in their respective fields, perhaps due to maybe prior exposure or training since young or even just greater access to resources, which leads schools to probably taking, all the talent for one particular sport in one particular school, right? So usually this leads to unequal opportunities, where students from privileged backgrounds gain more of an edge, due to their ability to afford private coaching or enrichment programs, and it also narrows talent identification, which means potentially talented but underdeveloped students may be overlooked, right? Especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, as well as, other students that may not have prior experience but want to join the CCA. right? They also have to be developed as part of holistic education. And teachers and students, cannot and they should not focus solely on developing only DSA students, but all students.
Right.
So I think the DSA system actually invited quite a bit of this because, schools obviously want to target students with greater talent, to win competitions and stuff like that. But I think Minister mentioned in the interview recently, that, if you take all the talent into one school, who is that team going to compete with in the games and in the different competitions that they have? Yeah.
I see. So how will tackling the issues of green harvesting lead to a better system? I mean, what changes can we expect in the selection process to better recognize and develop raw potential in students?
Right. So Min has actually said that, there are two errors, that people tend to make in the DSA process. Number one, you don't select those with potential. And number two, you just completely select the wrong person, right? So in this review, he hopes to minimize these two errors. So while MOE has yet to release details about the changes in the selection process, I think Minister has emphasized, that he wants it to remain objective and transparent. The selection process, right, should remain completely transparent and objective. So I think earlier in 2024, Minister mentioned a few things that he wanted, the leadership team of the school to be involved. So it's not just based on coaches' assessment, but also the leadership team of the school, especially in final decisions, right? So currently, the student goes through two stages for DSA. Number one will be the showcase of their skills and performance. And number two, they'll be interviewed to see, whether they are a good fit for the school culture and stuff like that.
I see.
Yeah, so I wish I could give you more details, but for now, Minister has said that, details will be released in Q2 or 2025.
I see.
Yeah.
So what role will teachers then play in identifying talent and, at earlier stages, and how will they be supported in this process?
Right. So again, apologies, not many details were released yet by the ministry, but Minister did mention, that teachers will actually be trained more equipped to identify students, that are perhaps younger, like primary 4, primary 5, to identify those with potential, right? And I think there are various programs in primary schools that parents will be encouraged to send their children to, where we will help them, develop in a certain sport, and then teachers will help to actually talent spot from these programs, which will help them to, encourage students to go for DSA or even just to focus on their development in the particular activity.
I see. Well, circling back to the current DSA scheme, I mean, it seems like we've talked about accessibility here, and it remained a top concern with only 6% of DSA students coming from low-income families. What barriers do students from low-income families face when applying through the DSA at the current moment, and how does MOE plan to address these?
So the most obvious barriers probably be lack of training, right, or preparatory classes that more affluent families can afford. So these low-income families, they have a monthly gross household income of 3,000 or less, right, or monthly per capita income of 750 or less. So they might be beat up for the DSA spot by students with more training than them. Yeah. So currently, MOE and schools, they do have programs in place to help primary school pupils identify their strengths. So, for example, they do run this junior sports academy where they take in students who show potential, with no prior training needed. So these are not specific to your household income, right? So any student can actually join this, which gives them more access regardless of your background. You can still receive training even if you don't go for an outside private training academy, right?
I see.
So secondary schools, when they take in students and when they go through the DSA process, they also consider students' interest, potential, and personal qualities, like drive and resilience that Minister mentioned this earlier.
I see.
So during the DSA process, different opportunities that students from wealthier families and lower income families are also taken into account.
Right.
So it's meant to be like a holistic assessment of the student and their background as well. So I believe that the ministry is planning to, improve this by ensuring that students are recognized for their potential and not just their performance through the ways mentioned above, right? So teachers will be taught how to identify talent, and coaches will also be guided on how to choose students not just with performance, but also with potential. So one example that Minister gave during the interview was that, instead of looking whether, for example, a student DSAing for football, right, whether he can kick the ball, but also, potential being like, does the student have spatial awareness? Does he know where to be on the pitch and stuff like that, which is aspects of potential, that coaches can look out for as well. Yeah.
I see. I mean, you did mention that more details will be, coming out in the later half of this year or Q2 of 2025. Now, did Minister Chan mention some ways that MOE plans to ensure that schools demonstrate their ability to nurture both DSA and non-DSA students equally?
Yeah, I'm afraid he has not released any details so far.
I see.
Yeah.
Are there any safeguards that will also be in place to maintain objectivity and transparency in the revised DSA selection process?
I'm not sure whether there'll be updated safeguards in place, but MOE has said, that earlier, CCA coaches and instructors have to declare conflict of interest, involve the leadership team, and even, warning coaches, that they may be deregistered if they market their services by implying that they can influence DSA outcomes. So these are the current guidelines that are in place, but no clue on whether they'll be updated or anything like that.
I see. Well, MOE's plans to review the DSA process is said to be part of efforts to, so-called strengthen the middle and stretch the top, offering more options and tailored pathways for students. What does this mean in practical terms for students and schools, and how will this shape one's learning experience?
Right. So these were actually the priorities shared by Minister, where really the Ministry of Education wants to push students to be more curious about learning, right, and to do more other than chase their grades and their academics. So one example that Minister shared was that, he wanted students to come up with their own value propositions, right? Like, what is something that makes you special? And he said that, these are discovered, when they go for more experiences, meet new people, go on overseas exchanges, right? So this is one way, where you wanted to stretch the top by challenging them, where you come up with your own value proposition, what do you have to offer? What is special about you? What is unique about you, right? And for strengthening the middle, I believe that Minister is focused on mostly ensuring more accessible opportunities, for them. So I think while he didn't give practical changes, I think his overall message was that, each student should really just go beyond chasing the paper, right? And to develop qualities like confidence, resilience, among other life skills.
Right. And before we let you go here, Gabrielle, what outcomes does, MOE hope to achieve with these reforms, particularly in redefining what success means for students?
Very, very early on in the year, Minister, there was a lot of release of how Singapore has ranked very well in, creativity and stuff like that. But Minister has really said that, these metrics are to be taken with a pinch of salt, right? And the success of our education goes beyond the just rankings, right? And he said very clearly, that it should be based on whether individuals want to continue learning, their love for learning, where they can develop qualities like creativity, resilience, confidence. And I think what MOE hopes to achieve is that where every student can find their best fit, their best path. And then he wants to make sure the system actually works for that to happen.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Gabrielle Chan, who's a journalist at the Straits Times. To read more, do check out Gabrielle's article on the Straits Times. It's titled Review of DSA Scheme Among MOE's Priorities for 2025, Tan Chun Sing. Now, this has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.